Talking about my process and how I sort of come to think of what I'm going to be putting onto a plate and finally making a print from. A lot of my work revolves around the landscape and not just the landscape in a literal sense. I've tried over the years to move away from a representation of landscape as you would traditionally think of a sort of a beautiful, awe-inspiring landscape that we are, surrounded by here in Australia, but to think of the landscape in a more of an abstract way to tell a story about what environmental issues and so forth. So recently I did a trip, and usually my work comes after a trip, and this particular one was in the Kimberley region of northwest Australia, northeast, southwest, yes, Australia. And I find that with landscape, if I either go very close or very far away, I can sort of create my vision in that I get something a little bit more abstract. So in this scenario here, I did some aerial photography of the mudflats up in the Derby area in the Kimberley, Derby, which is close to Broome. And this is a photopolymer plate, as I explained before, but it's actually a combination of. So what I did was I went to the Kimberley and we camped there, and I find camping really in one place for a long period of time really sort of informs my work in that I can absorb my surroundings and just quiet space. And I did some watercolour work inspired by the colours of the Kimberley area, using the natural pigments and reproducing them in watercolour. And I just had a small watercolour book, and I just painted a whole lot of watercolours, very abstract watercolours that ended up looking something like this in a small format. I then photographed the original watercolours and I printed them digitally using a pigment printer, my Epson 7890 pigment printer, onto an etching paper. So it's enlarged from the small watercolours that I did there in the Kimberley area. There's another one, you can see there. I then used that background, and keeping in mind that this is a digital print, but originally comes from a hand watercolour, I don't know what you would call these, blotches, I guess. Working very sort of organically, just putting down the colours not in a formulated way. I wasn't thinking of form or structure, or I was just organically putting them down as just with a colour to get that interpretation of the colour. And it came from after a lot of walking and looking at the rocks and the textures in the rocks and the colours and the earth and so forth. So that's what appeared from that. And then I overprinted the aerial abstracts of these mudflats, which are the veins of the earth, really. When this area in Derby is they have what they call the king tides, and huge areas, kilometres of areas, get flooded every time the tide comes in, twice a day. So it's quite extraordinary to see how this landscape changes every day. That's an interpretation of that area using this combination of this hybridising technique of going from the handmade to the digital, back to the handmade, and ending up with a combination of both as a limited edition print. So I will only make 5 of these. Yeah, this is an edition of 5. So it finishes after 5 prints and I go on to the next one. So there's one there and I did have another one out here. So for me it's, you know, great fun being able to mix and match all these techniques to get what I want. After I completed the edition of prints, which was 5 prints, I like to sort of make use of all of my prints that didn't quite make it into an edition, and I make artist books which are hand bound, and here's an example of an artist book, yeah, with a nice simple perspex cover, and the work is reinterpreted into another format, and in this case an artist book. So an artist book is different to a photo book as such. It doesn't necessarily, the content doesn't tell a story in a linear fashion, but an art book is really about the object of the book as well as the content, which is different to a photo book, I guess. So yeah, just another way to keep the work alive and in a different format.